The whispers carried on the wind through the ancient, towering redwoods of the Pacific Northwest. Tales of things that moved unseen, of shadows that stretched longer than the sunset, and of strange disappearances that had plagued the isolated communities for generations. This wasn't merely a forest. It was a cathedral of emerald and moss, a living, breathing entity whose secrets were guarded by an impenetrable silence and the relentless shroud of mist. Locals spoke of hikers vanishing without a trace, sometimes leaving behind nothing but a forgotten pack or a snapped compass. Hunters, seasoned and stoic, occasionally returned from deep within its depths, with wild, unfocused eyes and stories they'd never dare repeat in full daylight, only cryptic hints of guttural calls and immense silent presences. The air itself seemed to hum with an ancient energy, a primal current that hinted at something far older, far grander, and infinitely more mysterious than any map could ever chart. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed to hold a breath, a pause, as if the forest itself was listening, waiting, watching. It was a place where the veil between the known and the unknown felt impossibly thin, a place that promised wonder, but often delivered only a gnawing, existential unease. Elias Vance was a man forged by this very wilderness. A forest ranger for nearly 2 decades, his domain was this vast, untamed expanse, a territory he knew intimately. Every hidden spring, every deer trail, every ancient sentinel tree. His face, weathered by sun and wind, told a story of solitary dedication. His eyes, the color of moss-covered stones, missed nothing. He moved through the undergrowth with a quiet grace, his boots barely disturbing the fallen needles, his senses acutely attuned to the subtle symphony of the wild. Elias was more than just a ranger. He was a protector, a silent guardian of the immense ecosystem, his life a testament to his profound respect for nature. He could read the wind like a book, track an injured animal through impossible terrain, and anticipate coming storm days before the weather reports. His sharp observation skills were legendary among the few colleagues he encountered, his dedication bordering on obsession. Yet, beneath the stoic exterior and the almost spiritual connection to the land, lay a profound loneliness, a quiet ache that had settled deep in his bones over years of solitary patrols. The wilderness was his solace, his unwavering companion, but it also mirrored the vast, empty spaces within him. He rarely sought human company, preferring the honest, unvarnished truth of the forest. One particularly dense morning, the fog so thick it felt like moving through a dream, Elias was conducting a routine patrol near the perimeter of a section of the forest known colloquially as the Whispering Peaks Reserve. This area was officially restricted, designated for wildlife preservation with minimal human interference, mainly due to its highly rugged and unstable terrain. He navigated by instinct, his internal compass a far more reliable guide than any GPS in this signal-starved land. He was checking on a small, isolated stand of ancient firs, often frequented by elk, when something stopped him dead in his tracks. His eyes, usually scanning the canopy for signs of disease or the ground for illegal traps, fixated on the soft, damp earth beside a decaying log. There, imprinted with an undeniable clarity, were footprints. But these were no ordinary tracks. They were far too large for any known animal in the region. Larger than a grizzly bear, certainly, and possessing an oddly proportioned, almost human-like heel and 5 distinct, widely splayed toes. The stride length, too, was immense, indicating a creature of considerable height and power. Elias knelt, his gloved hand hovering inches above the impression, his ranger's intuition screaming at him. He knew every animal print, every human shoe size that had ever trespassed this land. This was neither. The print was deep, suggesting significant weight, and the edges were sharp, indicating it was recent, perhaps laid down only hours before the fog had rolled in. This wasn't merely an anomaly. It was a profound puzzle, an intrusion into the carefully ordered world he had meticulously catalogued in his mind. These footprints led directly away from any established trail, venturing deeper into the most inaccessible parts of the restricted reserve, towards terrain even the hardiest hunters avoided. A flicker of unease, cold and sharp, ignited in his gut. It wasn't the fear of danger, not yet, but the unsettling realization that something utterly unknown, something fundamentally outside his comprehensive understanding of the wilderness, inhabited his sacred domain. His professional curiosity, a keen, almost scientific need to understand and categorize, was instantly piqued, but it was overshadowed by a deeper, more primal sense of disquiet. The forest, which he had always understood, suddenly felt like a stranger, holding a secret it refused to yield. Every rustle now seemed to carry a different weight, every shadow an unseen observer. The wilderness had always been his home, a place of comforting predictability within its wildness. Now, for the first time in a very long time, it felt profoundly alien. The urge to follow was immediate and overwhelming. He knew he shouldn't. Not alone, not without backup, not without a clear understanding of what he might be pursuing. But the ranger in him, the protector, the seeker of truth, simply could not turn away. He pulled out his satellite phone, knowing the signal would be patchy at best, but felt an inexplicable hesitation. This felt different, something he needed to witness, to understand, before bringing others into its orbit. He tucked the phone back into his pack, a quiet resolve settling over him. The decision was made. He would follow the tracks. He would find out what left them. Our world is full of untold stories, of mysteries lurking just beyond the edge of our perception. If you are as captivated by the hidden depths of the wild as we are, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible narratives that push the boundaries of belief and unveil the secrets of nature. The discovery of the oversized footprints had set a new, unsettling rhythm for Elias Vance. His usual solitary patrols, once filled with the peaceful contemplation of ancient trees and the distant calls of wildlife, now throbbed with an undercurrent of heightened awareness. The forest, his lifelong companion, suddenly felt less known, more enigmatic. He couldn't shake the image of those impossible impressions in the soft earth, their sheer scale defying any logical explanation. His ranger training, steeped in observation and deduction, demanded answers, yet his pragmatic mind wrestled with the implications. He began his solitary investigation with the meticulousness of a seasoned tracker. Each morning, he'd strike out from his remote cabin, not along the familiar, well-trodden paths, but deep into the less explored sectors, guided by an instinct he'd honed over decades. The initial conflict, subtle as a whisper in the wind, was with his own ingrained skepticism. Local legends, the whispers of Sasquatch and forest giants, were the stuff of campfire tales, not the reality he managed daily. Yet the evidence he unearthed, piece by painstaking piece, began to chip away at that sturdy disbelief. His first significant find was a series of broken branches high above his head, far too high for any known animal, and certainly beyond the reach of any human without specialized equipment. These weren't snapped by a falling tree. They looked deliberately broken, almost as if cleared from a path. Their jagged ends pointed towards the densest parts of the ancient woods, areas so thick with undergrowth and fallen timber that even Elias rarely ventured there. A strange, guttural scent, musky and earthy, sometimes hung in the air, fleeting but distinct. It wasn't game animal, nor decaying flora. It was something else, something primal and unsettling. Every time he caught a whiff, an inexplicable chill ran down his spine, a primal warning from an evolutionary past. The feeling of being watched was perhaps the most persistent and unnerving aspect of his burgeoning inquiry. It was not a malevolent gaze, but a constant, unseen presence that made the hairs on his arms rise. He'd pause, mid-stride, listening intently, his keen eyes scanning the dense foliage, but would find nothing. The silence that followed these moments often felt heavier, more profound than the usual forest hush. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of an unknown observer. The vast, unyielding wilderness itself seemed to conspire to keep its secrets, stretching out before him, an endless labyrinth of trees and shadows, each turn concealing more questions than answers. The more he searched, the more elusive this profound presence became, cloaked in the very vastness of the land he swore to protect. Frustration began to mount as days turned into weeks. Elias decided to escalate his efforts, employing technology to bridge the gap between his human limitations and the forest's boundless mysteries. He meticulously set up several motion-activated cameras in strategic locations where he had found the most compelling signs. He positioned them carefully, camouflaged against tree trunks, their infrared sensors poised to capture any movement, however slight, in the dead of night. Alongside the cameras, he experimented with bait stations. Guided by decades of observing animal behavior, he left out various items: an apple, a small sack of dried berries, even a piece of jerky. He theorized that if it was indeed a large terrestrial creature, it would be drawn to accessible food sources, especially in the more remote regions where natural forage might be sparser. He chose spots near those impossibly broken branches, or where the strange scent had been strongest. Each morning, before dawn broke, Elias would return to check his stations, his heart thrumming with a mixture of hope and trepidation. And each morning, he was met with the same baffling results. The cameras, without fail, were either completely undisturbed, showing hours of swaying leaves and scurrying rodents, or, more mysteriously, they were often slightly askew, their lenses pointed harmlessly at the sky or a patch of ground. It was never enough to suggest human tampering. It was too subtle, too precise, as if something had deliberately, yet gently, repositioned them. The bait stations were equally perplexing. Sometimes the offerings would be gone, but with no discernible tracks nearby, no broken twigs or flattened undergrowth to indicate a path. Other times, the objects were simply moved, placed a few feet away, as if examined, and then discarded without interest. Once he found a perfectly peeled apple rind, but the core was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving him with a profound sense of being outsmarted. It was as if whatever he sought was aware of his methods, anticipating his moves, always one step ahead. The relentless cycle of investigation and frustration began to take its toll. The isolation of his work, once a source of peace, now felt like a heavy cloak. He found himself talking aloud to the empty forest, rehearsing his observations, trying to make sense of the elusive puzzle. He reviewed his camera footage endlessly, frame by frame, searching for anomalies, for a fleeting shadow, a shimmer of fur, anything that would provide definitive proof. But there was nothing, only the unending green expanse, the rustling leaves, and the ever-present, watchful silence. The enigma deepened with each passing day, transforming his professional curiosity into an almost obsessive quest, an urgent need to understand the powerful, unseen presence that shared his wilderness home. His skepticism had all but evaporated, replaced by a growing conviction that something extraordinary and profoundly intelligent resided within the ancient heart of these woods. The air in the ancient woods grew heavier, thick with an almost electrical charge that seemed to hum just beneath Elias's skin. His solitary investigation, once driven by detached curiosity, had now taken on an unnerving intensity. The subtle signs he'd been tracking for weeks, the inexplicable broken branches, the faint primal musk carried on the wind, began to coalesce into a more immediate, palpable presence. It started subtly, a distant, guttural howl that wasn't quite animal, yet profoundly wild, reverberating through the very marrow of his bones. It echoed not just through the forest, but within him, stirring something ancient and forgotten. He'd frozen, rifle clutched tight, scanning the impenetrable green, but saw nothing. The sound, however, had left an indelible mark, a chilling premonition of proximity. Then came the glimpses, fleeting and phantom-like. A colossal dark silhouette, just at the edge of his peripheral vision, melting back into the dense foliage the instant he turned his head. It was like trying to catch smoke, an illusion playing tricks on his tired eyes. Yet each fleeting apparition amplified the strange tension in the forest. He'd blink, rub his eyes, tell himself it was a trick of light and shadow, but the prickling sensation on his neck, the undeniable feeling of being observed, spoke a different truth. The woods, once a familiar comfort, now felt like a labyrinth of watchful eyes. One afternoon, while inspecting a rarely visited section of old-growth timber, he stumbled upon something truly perplexing. Tucked beneath the sprawling roots of a monumental Douglas fir was a creation of meticulous, almost artistic design. It was a nest, but unlike any bird or mammal nest he had ever encountered in his decades as a ranger. Woven with incredible precision from thick, pliable branches and densely packed moss, it was too large for any known animal in the region, yet too intricate for mere animal instinct. It spoke of deliberation, of care, perhaps even of a fledgling intelligence. He ran his calloused fingers over the tightly bound materials, a profound sense of awe and unease intertwining within him. This wasn't merely a creature, it was a craftsman. The escalation culminated days later, a cold, misty morning when the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias was deep in a ravine, carefully tracking a fresh set of the enormous bipedal footprints he'd first discovered. The air was still, broken only by the drip of moisture from the leaves and his own measured breaths. He felt an intense focus, a heightened sense of connection to the raw earth beneath his boots. Suddenly, from the dense underbrush to his right, came a powerful, unforeseen surge. It wasn't an attack in the predatory sense, no claws or teeth, but a forceful, deliberate shove. He barely registered the impact before he was sent tumbling down the steep embankment, scrambling for purchase, his rifle clattering away. He landed hard at the bottom, winded, his body aching, his head spinning. As he pushed himself up, dazed, he saw it. Towering over him, silhouetted against the misty gray of the ravine, was a massive, hirsute figure. It was immense, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur that seemed to absorb the light. Its shoulders were broad, its posture powerfully stoic. Yet there was a peculiar quality to its presence, not purely threatening. For a long, agonizing moment, they simply stared at each other. Its eyes, deep-set and intelligent, held a complex mix of fear and something else, perhaps a desperate plea. They were not the eyes of a beast, but of a being, ancient and world-weary. In that shared, timeless gaze, a profound understanding, raw and unspoken, passed between them. Elias felt a sudden, almost spiritual connection, an instinctual comprehension that transcended language. Then, as swiftly and silently as it had appeared, the creature melted back into the dense fog and foliage, vanishing without a trace, leaving only the profound silence and the lingering image of its intense knowing eyes. Disoriented, his body protesting from the fall, Elias lay there for a long time, the cold mist clinging to his skin. The encounter had not been violent, not intended to harm, but to clearly communicate a boundary, a warning. He was shaken, not by fear, but by the sheer magnitude of what he had witnessed, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility it ignited within him. The secrets of this forest ran deeper, far deeper, than he had ever imagined. Pushing himself to a sitting position, still processing the raw, visceral reality of the moment, he looked into the empty space where the creature had stood. The stillness of the forest seemed to amplify his voice, making his words resonate with a strange solemn weight. I understand," he whispered, his voice hoarse, echoing in the vast ancient silence. "I won't tell anyone. I promise. Your secret is safe with me." The words were not just to the empty air, but to the forest itself, to the very spirit of the wild, and to the massive, intelligent being that now haunted his every thought. An unbreakable pact had been forged in the ethereal mist of the ravine, a promise to protect the hidden heart of the wilderness. The silent compact, formed in the mists of the ravine, fundamentally altered Elias's perception of his role, transforming his professional dedication into a sacred trust. The forest, once merely his charge, now harbored a profound, living secret he was sworn to protect. He ceased his attempts at tracking in the conventional sense, understanding that observation was now an act of respect, not pursuit. His patrols became deliberate, meditative journeys, less about surveillance and more about presence, a quiet guardianship. The initial shock of the encounter slowly gave way to a deeper curiosity, a yearning to understand the massive being that had looked into his soul with such an ancient gaze. He began leaving small offerings, a practice that felt almost ritualistic for a man of science, yet profoundly right in the context of their unspoken agreement. At the precise spot where the creature had vanished, he'd place ripe berries foraged from the sunlit clearings, sometimes a portion of his dried venison or an apple. He never waited, never watched. He would leave the items carefully arranged on a flat rock or nestled in a tree hollow, then continue his patrol, allowing the forest to work its quiet magic. Days later, upon his return, the food would be gone. But more significantly, he would often find something new in its place. Small, intricately carved wooden figures, sometimes effigies of birds or deer, sometimes abstract shapes that hinted at a complex, unknown symbology. These were not crude carvings. They bore the mark of patient, deliberate craftsmanship, smoothed by unknown hands, imbued with a silent message of reciprocity. Each discovery sent a shiver of awe through him, confirming the intelligence and the delicate thread of communication they were weaving. These exchanges deepened his conviction that this was not merely an animal, but a sentient entity with a culture, a history. His scientific mind struggled to reconcile these facts with known biology, but his gut, sharpened by years in the wild, knew the truth. Driven by this evolving understanding, Elias began to research with a renewed intensity, but his focus shifted. He delved into the archives of local history, not for flora and fauna, but for folklore, for forgotten tales and indigenous wisdom. He spent hours in the ranger station library, poring over brittle, yellowed texts and consulting ethnographic records from nearby reservations. What he found resonated deeply with his experiences. Recurring themes emerged across different tribal narratives. Stories of forest giants, hairy people, and protectors of the land. These were not monsters of children's tales, but often benevolent, powerful beings, guardians of the wilderness, sometimes fierce, sometimes shy, always deeply connected to the earth. One particular legend spoke of the Old Man of the Mountain, a towering, hairy figure who watched over the sacred groves and ensured the balance of nature. Another described the Whisperers, who communicated through subtle signs and nudges, guiding those who respected the forest and warning away those who sought to harm it. Elias realized with a jolt that these weren't merely myths. They were ancestral knowledge, passed down through generations, encoding the very presence he had encountered. He was not alone in his revelation. Countless others had seen or sensed or known. This creature was not an anomaly, but an ancient inhabitant, deeply rooted in the land's history, a living embodiment of the wilderness itself. The modern world had simply forgotten how to see it. As the weeks turned into months, Elias found himself increasingly attuned to the subtle rhythms of the forest and the almost imperceptible changes in his powerful silent companion. He would occasionally catch glimpses of it from a distance, a fleeting shadow among the trees, a powerful form disappearing behind a ridge. He never pursued, simply observed. And through these observations, a new, unsettling detail began to emerge. The majestic figure, once seemingly impervious, now displayed a subtle vulnerability. He noticed a recurring limp in its powerful stride, a slight hitch that wasn't always present, but seemed to manifest particularly after long intervals or in challenging terrain. There was also a tremor, sometimes visible in its hands when it paused to inspect something, or a slight tremble in its massive shoulders when it rested against a tree. At first, Elias dismissed these as normal variations, perhaps an old injury or a momentary stiffness. But as he continued to witness them, a pattern began to form. The limp seemed to worsen on colder days, the tremor more pronounced after periods of exertion. He saw the creature pause more frequently, sometimes for extended periods, leaning heavily against ancient trunks, its head bowed. A deep-seated sense of distress began to gnaw at Elias. He instinctively understood that this creature, despite its immense power and ancient wisdom, was not indestructible. It was ailing, burdened by some invisible weight, some underlying physical ailment that was slowly, subtly taking its toll. He didn't know the cause. Was it age, an old wound, a chronic condition? The forest offered its secrets slowly, grudgingly, and this particular vulnerability remained shrouded, a silent plea he could not yet decipher. The unspoken pact had broadened. It was no longer just about keeping a secret, but about recognizing a need, a quiet suffering he was powerless to alleviate. The thought troubled him deeply, adding a layer of poignant urgency to his solitary guardianship. The quiet companionship Elias had begun to forge with the elusive forest giant underwent a stark transformation, abruptly punctured by a new, grating discord that ripped through the forest's ancient calm. It began subtly, a faint, distant hum of machinery, an unnatural grinding sound carried on the wind that grew steadily louder over a few days. Then came the unmistakable, jarring cacophony of internal combustion engines, the loud shouts of men, and the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of axes striking wood. Elias, on his usual patrol route, felt an immediate chill crawl up his spine, These were not the sounds of hikers or regulated logging operations. This was a brutal industrial assault on the wilderness, an invasive presence that spoke of greed and disregard. He diverted his path, moving with a heightened stealth he'd honed over years of solitary vigilance. His ranger instincts screamed danger. Peeking through a thicket of ferns and young saplings, he saw them. A group of perhaps 5 men, heavily armed, their faces grim and unyielding, their clothing camouflaged, but clearly not standard issue for any official government entity. They were felling old-growth trees with powerful chainsaws, their movements rough and unskilled, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Their camp, a crude affair of hastily erected tents and makeshift fire pits, was littered with empty cans and discarded equipment. These were not recreational campers. They were prospectors, or poachers, driven by something far more sinister than a love of nature. They were a virus, an external threat to everything he had sworn to protect, and more acutely, a direct menace to the fragile, hidden peace he had established with the Sasquatch. The forest, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now throbbed with a palpable tension. The usual symphony of birdsong was muted, replaced by the grating roar of machinery and the coarse laughter of the intruders. Elias observed them from a distance for several hours, documenting their coordinates, their numbers, their weaponry. He noted their casual disregard for the environment, their careless disposal of waste, and the way they moved with an air of entitlement, as if the ancient woods were nothing more than a resource to be plundered. There was a raw, primitive violence in their presence that made his stomach churn. Sending a report back to headquarters would take time. Time the forest and its hidden inhabitant might not have. The Sasquatch, once a ghost, now seemed to become a whirlwind of agitated energy. Elias started finding clear warning signs left specifically for him. A massive tree branch, snapped clean off at an impossible height, lay across a lesser-used path, unmistakably pointing in the direction of the intruder's camp. Later, near his usual drop-off point for offerings, he discovered a cluster of fresh, immense footprints, pressed deep into the damp earth, their toes splayed in a clear gesture of distress. The air around these signs carried a faint, musky scent, stronger and more pungent than usual, an olfactory signature of profound anxiety. One evening, as dusk was falling, Elias heard it, a series of guttural, resonant calls echoing through the valleys. It wasn't the haunting, melancholy howl he had heard before, but a rapid, almost frantic succession of roars that spoke of anger and alarm. The sound, emanating from deep within the protected zone, reverberated through his very bones. It was a cry not just of distress, but of desperate warning, a declaration of territory under siege. The Sasquatch was agitated, its normally cautious nature giving way to a primal urge to protect its home, and Elias felt the weight of its unspoken plea. The creature had trusted him, allowed him into its world, and now that world was under direct assault. Elias's mind raced, grappling with a profound moral dilemma. His promise to the Sasquatch was clear, to keep its existence a secret. But these intruders, these poachers or prospectors, posed an immediate and undeniable threat to its safety, and perhaps even its life. If he reported them, official channels would be alerted, and while the intruders might be removed, the ensuing investigation would inevitably lead to questions about the unusual animal activity in the area. The secrecy he had vowed to uphold would be irrevocably compromised. The Sasquatch, whose very survival depended on its anonymity, would be exposed. Yet, to do nothing felt like a betrayal. He had glimpsed the intelligence in its eyes, felt the silent communication, witnessed its attempts to warn him. He knew with an absolute certainty that this creature was not merely an animal, but something far more, a sentient being deeply connected to the ancient spirit of the forest. To allow these ruthless men to continue their desecration, to potentially harm the Sasquatch, felt morally reprehensible. His duty as a park ranger was to protect the wilderness from all threats, a duty that now felt inextricably linked to the singular, silent promise he had made in the ravine. The danger was also personal. These men were armed, desperate, and clearly operating outside the law. Confronting them directly would be incredibly risky, placing his own life in jeopardy. He was a ranger, not a soldier. Yet the image of the creature's distressed eyes, the urgent warnings it left for him, burned in his mind. He was caught between his oath to the wilderness, his promise to a remarkable being, and the chilling reality of human malice. He had to make a choice, and quickly, a choice that would define not only his future, but perhaps the very fate of the forest's most profound secret. The decision would demand cunning, courage, and a willingness to step far beyond the conventional boundaries of his profession. The lines were blurring, and Elias knew that his quiet life in the wilderness was about to become profoundly complicated. The ominous presence of the unauthorized interlopers had escalated beyond mere annoyance. Their activity now resonated with a palpable threat. Elias, ever vigilant, had been shadowing their movements for days, a phantom in his own forest. He observed their crude campsite, the discarded food wrappers, the carelessly extinguished fires, all hallmarks of those who took from the land without respect. Today, however, their actions took a far more sinister turn. From a hidden vantage point atop a rocky outcrop, Elias watched as the group, a motley crew of 3 rough-looking men, meticulously set up what could only be described as a sophisticated trap. They strung thick, almost invisible netting between several colossal trees, camouflaging it with meticulously placed branches and leaves. It was designed to snare something large, something with significant power, and seeing its scale, a cold dread began to coil in Elias's stomach. This was no ordinary animal trap. This was for a trophy of monumental, perhaps legendary proportions. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he recognized the area. It was a well-used game trail, but more importantly, it was a path he had seen the Sasquatch use on multiple occasions, a quiet route it favored for its solitary wanderings. Elias braced himself, hoping against hope that the creature would instinctively avoid it, that its ancient wisdom would guide it away from this human perfidy. But the forest, for all its wisdom, could sometimes be predictable in its patterns. The wait felt like an eternity, each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, sending a jolt of anxiety through him. Then, a massive shadow detached itself from the deeper woods, moving with a familiar, powerful stride. It was the Sasquatch. It approached the camouflaged snare with apparent unawareness, its focus perhaps on the faint scent of wild berries or a distant stream. Elias's breath caught in his throat, a silent scream building in his mind. In a horrifying instant, the colossal form stepped onto the hidden trap. The net, constructed with brutal efficiency, sprang taut, enveloping the creature in a tangle of thick cords. A profound, guttural roar ripped through the forest, a sound of pure agony and desperate confusion that echoed through the ancient trees, shaking the very ground beneath Elias's feet. The Sasquatch thrashed violently, its immense strength straining against the ropes, but the net held fast, pulled tighter with each powerful surge. The men, who had been waiting in ambush, immediately emerged from their hiding spots, whooping with triumphant glee. Their crude celebration, a jarring desecration of the forest's sanctity. As Elias watched the powerful creature struggle, bound and helpless, another, even more heartbreaking sound pierced the air. From a clump of dense ferns nearby, a smaller, high-pitched cry erupted, a sound of utter distress, of fear and loss. Elias's blood ran cold. It wasn't alone. Barely concealed by the undergrowth, a smaller juvenile Sasquatch emerged, its eyes wide with terror, its tiny hands clutching at the air in a desperate plea. It was a mere fraction of the adult size, a small, vulnerable echo of its parent. This was the reason. This was the profound secret, the underlying fear that had driven the creature's isolation, its cautious movements, its deep-seated need for anonymity. It wasn't just protecting itself. It was protecting its child, the future of its kind. The full weight of the Sasquatch's hidden vulnerability, its true motivation for secrecy, crashed down on Elias with overwhelming clarity. A surge of protective fury, primal and unequivocal, coursed through Elias. All rational thought, all fear for his own safety, evaporated. He couldn't stand by and watch this atrocity unfold. He had to act. Without a moment's hesitation, Elias gripped his rifle, not with the intent to harm, but to create chaos, to draw attention, to buy precious time. Taking careful aim at the ground a safe distance from the poachers, he fired a single sharp warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed like a thunderclap, momentarily stunning the men, their triumphant shouts abruptly silenced. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing out here?" Elias bellowed, his voice amplified by the forest, deliberately making his presence known. He fired another shot, this one closer to their position, kicking up dirt and leaves. "This is restricted federal land! You're trespassing! Get out of here now!" The poachers, startled and disoriented by the unexpected intervention, turned their attention from their struggling captive to the new, unseen threat. They scrambled, fumbling for their own weapons, their crude plans disrupted. Elias, a master of this terrain, knew exactly how to manipulate their fear and confusion. He fired a third shot, then immediately melted back into the dense foliage, circling around, making himself heard but never seen. He led them on a wild goose chase, a perilous ballet through the labyrinthine trails and rocky slopes he knew so intimately. He plunged into a thicket of thorns, knowing they would hesitate. He scrambled up a sheer rock face, leaving them struggling to follow. He used every trick in his ranger's handbook, every bit of knowledge about the forest, to disorient them, to send them deeper into uncharted territory, away from the trapped Sasquatch. He shouted warnings about patrols, about dangerous wildlife, anything to keep them chasing his phantom. While Elias skillfully orchestrated this diversion, a desperate drama was unfolding back at the trap site. The adult Sasquatch, fueled by a primal, fierce instinct to protect its offspring, found a renewed surge of strength. With roars of pure defiance and a titanic effort, it strained against the thick ropes, its powerful muscles bulging, tearing at the net with tooth and claw. The cries of its young, now joined by its own grunting efforts, spurred it on. With a final, explosive heave, the net ripped, fibers snapping like gunshots, free, injured, but unbroken. The massive creature scooped up its terrified offspring with a tenderness that contradicted its raw power, and vanished into the impenetrable depths of the forest. The silent understanding between Elias and the Sasquatch deepened, forged in that critical moment of shared peril. He knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that the creature's immense secrecy, its relentless avoidance of human contact, was not born of malice or savagery, but of a profound, heartbreaking need to protect its innocent and vulnerable family from a world that could not comprehend, let alone tolerate, its existence. This wasn't merely a promise kept. It was a life saved. Elias, a shadow weaving through the ancient trees, pushed deeper into the wilderness, his movements fluid and purposeful. He deliberately chose the most challenging routes, knowing these men, with their heavy gear and urban sensibilities, would struggle. His boots found purchase on crumbling scree slopes. His hands grasped thorny branches that he knew to avoid if one valued soft skin, but now served as perfect deterrents. He heard their frustrated shouts, their heavy breathing, growing more labored with each arduous step. They were losing ground, mentally and physically. He had to keep them off balance, make them question their pursuit, and ultimately, their foolish decision to invade the sacred space. He led them through a gnarled section of old-growth forest, where massive roots snaked across the ground like petrified serpents, where fallen giants lay draped in moss, creating natural obstacles that he navigated with practiced ease. One of the poachers stumbled, cursing loudly, his rifle clattering against a rock before he recovered it. Their cohesion was breaking, their hunter's focus dissolving into bickering and exhaustion. Elias, ever the strategist, knew this terrain intimately, every hidden gully, every unstable rock face. He guided them towards a narrow gorge, a place he usually avoided due to its precarious nature, but ideal for his current objective. He moved ahead swiftly, finding a vantage point above a particularly steep and unstable section of the gorge wall. Below him, the poachers, now separated by perhaps 50 yards, were struggling to traverse the treacherous path. He saw the lead poacher, a burly man with a cruel glint in his eye, pause to wipe sweat from his brow, gesturing angrily at the one behind him. This was his chance. With calculated precision, Elias dislodged a medium-sized boulder with his foot, sending it tumbling down the slope. The boulder struck a precarious outcrop, triggering a chain reaction. A cascade of smaller rocks and gravel began to slide, not a massive avalanche, but enough to create a formidable, impassable barrier. The ground rumbled beneath them, a low, guttural growl from the earth itself. Dust plumed into the air as the rock slide intensified, effectively blocking the narrow path. The poachers screamed, scrambling backward, their faces contorted in terror. They were cut off, their path forward impassable. Their only option a difficult, demoralizing retreat from the way they had come. Elias watched them, a grim satisfaction settling over him. They were bruised, battered, and thoroughly defeated. He heard their frustrated shouts, their threats echoing off the canyon walls. But they were empty words now. Their morale was shattered, their illegal enterprise brought to a crashing halt, not by bullets, but by the very wilderness they sought to exploit. He observed them for a moment longer, ensuring their retreat was genuine, then melted back into the shadows, leaving them to their ignominious departure. The forest, once alive with their destructive noise, slowly settled back into its ancient rhythms. The aftermath was exactly as Elias had predicted. The poachers, nursing their injuries and bruised egos, reported him to the authorities, painting a picture of an unhinged ranger, harassing innocent hunters. But Elias had been meticulous in his documentation, a habit ingrained from years of federal service. His patrol logs were impeccable, detailing every anomaly, every suspicious sign he had found prior to their arrival. He had photographed the ruined traps, the discarded provisions, the subtle signs of their illegal activity even before their direct confrontation. He presented his detailed reports, outlining the illegal entry onto restricted land, the clear evidence of poaching attempts, and the reckless endangerment of both wildlife and himself. The local sheriff, A pragmatic man who knew Elias and respected his dedication, listened patiently. The poachers, on the other hand, had a history of minor infractions, and their story, riddled with inconsistencies and lacking any real proof of Elias's alleged harassment, quickly unraveled. The balance of evidence swung decisively in Elias's favor. Within days, warrants were issued, not for Elias, but for the poachers. Their illegal activities, now fully exposed, led to their arrest and a swift, albeit deserved, legal process. Justice, in its slow, deliberate way, had prevailed. With the immediate threat neutralized, a profound weariness settled over Elias. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by the deep ache of his muscles and the emotional toll of the confrontation. He needed to return to the original meeting spot, to check, to confirm, to simply commune with the forest once more. It was a ritual now, a silent pilgrimage after every significant event. As he approached the familiar clearing, the air felt different, lighter, almost expectant. There, on the moss-covered rock where he had left his first offerings, lay a new carving. It was more elaborate than the others, a small, intricately rendered miniature of a family of three, two large figures protecting a smaller one. The detail was exquisite, the wood smoothed to a silken finish, a testament to hours of patient work. It was a clear, undeniable message. Family. But the gift didn't end there. As he continued his patrol along the path he often walked, a flash of brilliant sapphire caught his eye. Nestled carefully on a low branch, almost as if placed by a gentle hand, was a single, iridescent blue feather. It was from a Steller's jay, a common bird, yet this feather felt unique, special. It was a feather often associated with wisdom, with protection. It was a silent sign, a quiet acknowledgement, a deeply personal gesture of gratitude and continued trust. The Sasquatch had not only survived, but it remembered. It had seen his actions, understood his intentions, and had accepted his sacrifice. The alliance, forged in the crucible of peril, was stronger than ever, a bond silently renewed between man and creature, guardian and guarded, in the vast, whispering heart of the forest. The echoes of the poachers' thwarted pursuit faded into the forest, leaving behind a silence far more profound than any noise they could generate. Elias, battered and bruised, but utterly triumphant, felt a deep satisfaction settle within him. He had fulfilled his promise, not just to a creature, but to the very essence of the wilderness he swore to protect. The immediate danger had passed, the intruders driven back by a combination of his cunning and the forest's unforgiving embrace. He returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose, his patrols now imbued with a deeper meaning. Each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, was no longer just a sound of the wild, but a whisper of the ancient secret he now shared. The forest, once a place of solitary reverence, became a cathedral of quiet companionship. His days continued in their familiar rhythm, checking traps, mending trails, documenting wildlife, but everything felt different. The weight of his promise, once a solemn burden, had transformed into a source of profound strength. He understood now that true protection wasn't about building fences or posting signs. It was about fostering an unseen harmony, about guarding the delicate balance of life that thrived beyond human comprehension. He meticulously documented every sign of illegal activity, every discarded shell casing, every footprint left by the defeated poachers, building an irrefutable case against their return. When the official reports finally came through, confirming their apprehension and the charges pressed against them, Elias felt a surge of relief that went beyond professional satisfaction. Justice, in its own slow, methodical way, had been served, thanks to the silent guardian of the forest. The outside world had played its part, allowing the inner world to heal. With the human threat neutralized, the forest slowly exhaled, a palpable sigh of peace seeping back into its ancient roots. Elias, however, knew his vigil was far from over. He continued his regular circuits, but his eyes now scanned for different markers, his ears attuned to subtler calls. He made his way to the familiar meeting spot, the place where offerings had been exchanged for carved tokens, where trust had first begun to bloom. There, nestled precisely where he expected it, was another carving, a small smooth piece of wood, expertly shaped into the silhouette of a mother and child, their forms intertwined in an embrace of protection, and next to it, distinct from any bird found in these woods, lay a single, iridescent feather, a silent, beautiful token of gratitude. It was a message clearer than any spoken word, a reaffirmation of the unspoken pact between Ranger and Sasquatch, guardian and guarded. This quiet exchange solidified something profound within Elias. His profound loneliness, a constant companion for so long, had receded, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging. He wasn't alone in this vast wilderness. He was part of something ancient, something sacred. He had found a companion unlike any he could have imagined, a silent, powerful presence that shared his dedication to the forest's sanctity. This wasn't about proving anything to the world or about seeking validation. It was about an understanding that transcended words, a bond forged in shared peril and mutual respect. He realized that true understanding rarely came from scientific dissection or irrefutable proof. Instead, it blossomed in the quiet spaces, in the acceptance of mystery, in the embrace of the unknown. Elias Vance, the reclusive forest ranger, had become much more than that. He was a true guardian of the wild and keeper of secrets, a protector of the unseen world. He found solace in the rustling leaves, wisdom in the ancient trees, and companionship in the knowledge that a powerful, intelligent family thrived within his care, hidden from the prying eyes of a world not yet ready to know them. His life's purpose, once a vague sense of duty, was now sharply defined, filled with meaning and a quiet, enduring joy. He patrolled with a renewed vigor, each step a testament to his unwavering commitment. The forest, in turn, seemed to breathe easier around him, recognizing him as one of its own. His story, though untold to the broader world, was etched into the very fabric of the forest. He carried the weight of his promise with pride, a silent vow whispered among the pines. What other hidden creatures, what other extraordinary secrets might lurk in the untouched corners of our world, waiting for a kindred spirit to discover and protect them? The wilderness holds infinite mysteries, demanding only our respect, our silence, and our unwavering commitment to preserve them. Share your thoughts on these profound possibilities in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more extraordinary stories that challenge our perceptions and remind us of the incredible wonders that still exist just beyond our sight.